All right. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the 7th episode of our Pulling Weeds podcast. I go by FA, formerly known as Quality Over Quan on Instagram. And my real name is Jeffrey. And let me introduce you to my co-host, Michael, known as Ozark Nation.
How you guys doing?
Good to be with you.
Yeah, good to be with you, Jeffrey. It's been a pretty good week. How's your week been going in the garden and all that stuff?
Good. Battling through some minor injuries, but yeah, it's been productive. Had a nice consultation with a couple soil science places, helping with my friend's farm, and got about 20% more of my garden in the backyard to weed, so I can plant that. But corn is almost knee high, and tomatoes are cruising along, and got a bunch of ice cream melons and watermelons in the ground.
Nice.
So yeah, feeling good about it for sure. How about you?
We're finally chugging along at a little better clip now. Finally got all our peppers in the ground. That was quite a bit of work. I was aiming for about 700 peppers, but I think we fell down around somewhere like 340 or so, just from like old seed and stuff like that. And I wasn't really worried about getting the numbers up for this year, but about to harvest some melons. We have figs getting harvested every day now. It's pretty fun. I harvested a Celeste fig that was like 72 grams, which is pretty hefty. The average Celeste is like anywhere from like 35 to 50 grams. So it was well over the average. Got lit up by some fire ants in the garden planting peppers. So, that's always fun. Got bites all over my hand because they'll bite you. And then at the same time, they'll hunch over and sting you. So you'll end up with like two welts right next to each other. And it's just so bad. I'll wake up in the middle of the night just scratching my hands and wherever else they get you. It's pretty rough. But
yeah, I got back to the plant on Saturday after market, and I was in the restroom, and I looked at the mirror for a second, and I was like, "What is this on my neck?" And then I looked a little closer, and it was a tick that was just about to bite me, and it was like my first tick of the year, and I thought it was embedded. I was like, "What the?" And I pulled it off. It hadn't bit me yet. I got lucky, but I was like, "Oh yeah, that's what happens working with nature. Don't forget."
Yeah. We found a couple on the dogs, and I think I found one on me earlier in the season. But for me, that's really the only incentive to mow the yard really well is to keep the ticks down and stuff like that. And I stay up on the bug spray, but nothing works against the ants, man. The fire ants are just, you can move them around and get them to abort one hill and go somewhere else, but you're going to find them again. And they're just aggressive. They're the little bastards that'll come down your hose like 30 feet, just one solo fire ant to come find you and bite you. And you're like, really? Like, that was not necessary. But
I remember them from the East Coast. They were definitely pretty prevalent.
Yeah. So
I had a moment yesterday. I took the day off and drove about an hour and 15 minutes north to the Yuba River, and
nice.
it was beautiful. It was like the last few days has been like 102, 105. Yesterday was like 100, 101 in Grass Valley. So I went up that direction, and I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna go to the river and chill and take some of this fruit I have to eat. And so I get there, and there's this. I think I posted a couple pictures on my Instagram, but there's this cool like bridge that's like a house bridge, with like a cover on it, like old school wooden style. And I'm like, oh, I got to walk through that. So I walk to the other side of it, and I'm like, oh, left looks like more nature. So I go left, and I'm wearing flip flops, and I hike in like probably a third of a mile, half a mile, to where like no one's really around. There's a couple people on the trail, so I figured like there were some people back there. And there's a sign that says like, even though you're on the river, it says you're going back to a lake. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I cruise back that way. It's like up and down ridges, and then I see a trail to the left as the river splits, and I'm like, oh, I'll go down there and check it out. And I'm in flip flops, so I don't want to walk that far, and I walk down to the bottom of the hill, which is about 30 yards. And right when I get to the bottom of the hill, of course, I like slip because I have like a bag of produce and some other, my towel and stuff, and I slip and didn't really think too much about it, and walk down to the beach, which is pretty rocky. And I walk out on the beach and I see there's like kind of an island across the way. And for whatever reason, I thought like that island would have more sand than rocks. And I just wanted to like lie down by the river and chill in the sun. So I do that. I hike across the one side of the river, which is only about, 2 feet deep, and get to this island and lie down. My friend I just done delivery to gave me some ice cream that was made from our dairy. It's some really nice cantaloupe ice cream. So it still hadn't like melted all the way. So I sit down by the river and I eat this half pint of ice cream, and I'm like, this is just perfect. Can't hear anyone, except for birds chirping. And so I get in the river a couple times, and like the middle of the river is flowing pretty good. And when I got to the spot where I parked, there was park rangers and firemen there. Somebody had gotten caught like kind of in the river. It's still pretty hectic as far as like the run of it, with people, potentially drowning or whatever. So I'm like, I'm a really good swimmer. I'm like, I want to get out in the middle, but I'm like, I'm by myself way out here. I'll just kind of chill. And so I'm just swimming around in the river that's like 3 feet deep, like not going out to the middle. And I get out and I sit in the sun a couple times, and I get back in the river. And that was kind of my flow. Like every like 15 or 20 minutes, I was just hopping in the river to cool off because it's like 100 degrees. And so last time I like turn over on my towel and I lie on my stomach, and I'm like chilling, about to kind of fall asleep, definitely deep meditative mode. And I start hearing something, but I'm like, it's also picking up wind, and I'm like, oh, maybe it's just like the brush around me. There's some tall, like 6 foot brush that's kind of going off. And I'm like, it's, I don't think I hear anything. I'm like, maybe I'm just paranoid. I'm in the middle of nowhere. And then like, I felt like I heard like a footstep, and I'm like, oh, it's nothing. And I lie down, I lie down for like 10 more minutes, and I get hot enough where I'm like, all right, I'm going to get in the river. And I like pick myself up in like push-up mode, like pretty quickly. And I just am like, I'm just going to go hop in the river, and I go push myself up, and I stand up, and I go to take like 2 steps in the river. I don't have my glasses on, and my eyesight's like not great without my glasses. And I look across the river, more so I heard across the river, like this big, like very large animal jump up out of like it's down the embankment. It jumps up on a boulder, and I look across, and it's like all like dark brown, black. And at first I'm like, oh my God, is that a fucking cat? And because there's definitely mountain lions. There's a sign for mountain lions and rattlesnakes when you hike in the trail. And I'm like, oh my God, is that a cat? And I go like rushing over for my glasses, because by this time it's up into the brush, and I can't like find my glasses right away. I'm also kind of a little bit freaked out. And then I'm hearing this thing like up in the brush, and I'm starting to like, at first you're kind of freaked out when you see an animal that big, like at least for me, like that animal is definitely 3 times the size of me. And I'm like, what the fuck? And so I'm still hearing this animal in the brush, like over across the way, because it's just like heavy forest up above the river on the other side of the river. But it's not like running away. And I started thinking, I'm like, well, if that's a cat, I wouldn't hear it. The cat would just be moving pretty slowly. And so then I'm like, I finally get my glasses on, and I look over, and it's all like sunny and hazy, so I can't really see into the brush too well. But I can hear in the brush this animal still like probably perched 15 or 20 yards up from the river, or maybe less. But it's definitely sitting there and definitely kind of must be watching me. And I'm like, oh my God, that's a fucking black bear. And I don't think that black bears are going to hunt me by any means. But I'm also like, why didn't it run away? Right? So at this point, I'm like gathering my stuff, and I'm like, yeah, I should probably cruise, because the river's only like 25, 30 yards wide. Yeah. And I'm like 99% sure now, thinking back about it, that it was a bear. And I'm like, why isn't it cruising away? And I realized like it was probably a mama bear with its cubs. So it's probably like in defense of its cubs, like just kind of sitting there, like wants to let the cubs come down and swim in the river. Also is like kind of protecting of the cubs, and definitely is like there. Like I could have thrown a rock at it, no problem. So I like gather my things up, and mind you, I'm like on this island where I have to walk another 20 yards across like a 2-foot stream or river that's flowing pretty good. So on rocks where I can't move that fast across it, definitely not as fast as like this animal. And so I get across, and I like have to walk up this like 8-foot embankment on stones, pretty big stones. And once I get to the top of the embankment, like 2/3 of the way up, I can't really get up that easy. So I'm like slipping, and I'm wearing flip-flops, and mind you, through all the chaos, I'm not running, but I'm moving quick enough to where like I hope this thing isn't like following me or like thinking that I'm like embarking on its territory. So I kind of slipped at the top of the embankment, and I think in the whole process of it, I broke my toe somehow, because I got home and my toe is like very swollen, and the tip of it is very pink red, and it was just like a brilliant nature moment that I won't soon forget. And I've come across bears managing properties in Humboldt, and it's not that big a deal, but also like when you're in the middle of the field and you have a bunch of tools around you, I feel more like I can defend myself, and I really didn't have anything to like defend myself. So, and I was definitely far enough into the river where like if I yelled, the river's pretty loud. I'm not sure anybody would have heard me. So
yeah, barefoot and with food isn't the best way.
What's that?
Barefoot and with food probably isn't the best way to run into a bear.
Exactly. And I got like a bag full of fucking cherries and blueberries, and I'm like, oh my God, this is just like all wrong on certain levels. But yeah, it was kind of a great moment. I wound up like going to another river spot where there was more human beings and like soaking the river a little bit more, but it was just like, okay, you're in nature, respect it,
Yeah. I mean, the bear would be a little spooky. Definitely not fun to find cats though out in wild either. If you ever hear them screaming at night and stuff like that, I would not want to run into a mountain lion at nighttime. But they have them in Kansas. Everybody like cites them and stuff like that, and the state will deny that they're there. But there's been a couple in the newspaper, and then like I had a friend that actually shot one in a little small town in Kansas, and when he had shot it, he took it home, and within like an hour, a game warden showed up and was like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he's like, "Well, this cat was, bothering my cows and going to attack my cows, so I shot it." And the guy's like, "Well, that's fine, but you have to let it lay." And that led to questions. Well, obviously you guys are tagging these things, so you obviously know they're here.
Yeah, exactly.
So quickly to find the body. So it's pretty interesting. But I mean, they've always been in that area anyways. There's bears and mountain lions and wolves in Missouri. So, it's nothing new, but pretty cool that you got to, see a bear on the river and stuff like that. Sounds like a nice spot to be.
Yeah, I mean, it was cool. And I think if I had like another person or two with me, I definitely wouldn't have skedaddled out of there as much. I probably would have just sat there and like watched it. But it was an event, you know what I mean? It definitely was grounding. And like, I'm not a person that goes and does like a lot of like deep hiking by myself or camping by myself. I've done it a few times, but it's not something that I'm like super, well versed in. So, it's not like I won't go do it again, but I'm definitely going to be like maybe a little bit more prepared for such things to happen. And I really wasn't that far from the state park where there was like 30 people. So, yeah. I mean, I was like a third of a mile away, maybe a half a mile away. But like I said, the river was really loud. Like, it was definitely flowing pretty good. And, it had gone around a pretty significant bend to get down to where I was. So, grounding moment, beautiful, yet slightly scary. And yeah, bears are big. That was a much bigger bear than I saw running through my property in Humboldt when I was managing a farm a few years back.
Yeah, that would be definitely a little scary. I've never seen a bear in person like that. So,
especially because it didn't run away. Like, bears typically are more scared of you than you are of them, and like I would have thought it would have run up the hillside and run away, but that's when it was just like kind of sitting there posting, and I could hear it like in the brush, still like moving around, but definitely lurking. I was like, why is it lurking? And then I started thinking about it as I was walking away, and I was like, oh, it must have had cubs. I was like, because the cubs couldn't move that fast. So it's like more in defense mode of its cubs, and it makes a lot more sense. I mean, I don't know precisely that's what happened, but I mean, the last time I saw a bear in Humboldt, it was like booking away from me very quickly, and our dogs particularly. Yeah. I want to have a cane corso again when I go hiking. That is for sure.
maybe some boots.
Yeah, exactly. Hiking boots would be a good idea. I mean, just for rattlers alone, that's a good move. But
oh yeah, those are no fun either.
Yeah, so I thought that'd be a good time to share that story with you.
Yeah, thanks, man. I saw the pictures that you posted. I saw you mention something about mama bear. I was trying to zoom in, but I also have my phone on like that grayscale, so I can't see that much sometimes. It's kind of hard.
Yeah, I didn't have the moment to, take a picture, and I really wonder. I feel like it had to have smelled me, so I'm like, I wonder, since I was like lying down asleep, if it just felt like it could just go get in the water and do its thing and not worry about me. I mean, the river was 30 yards across. There's no way, it was busy enough. There's no way I was going to swim across it towards them, or I don't think that a bear can swim that quickly and that well to get across. It probably can, but it's a 50-50, but yeah, like I wish I would have gotten a picture of it, but I'm pretty sure it was in the water when I woke up, which was like, wow, and it was directly across from me, not like a little bit of a ways down or whatever, directly across from me, which was a little bit startling for sure.
Yeah, definitely sounds like it. That cantaloupe, probably smelled that cantaloupe ice cream, man. It sounds tasty. We've got a bunch of cantaloupes about ready for harvest, and I got one on the counter that's just making the whole house smell so good that, man, I could definitely do some cantaloupe ice cream.
Yeah, it had wildflower honey in it too, which I don't think helped my cause with the bear.
No, that sounds real good.
Yeah, it was damn good ice cream. I wasn't going to share it, but maybe if it asked nicely.
Yeah.
But yeah, what else is going on in the world? What else you been thinking about?
Well, I mean, I think considering the fact we talk about food security and, how it affects our health and nutrition so much, I found it pretty interesting. There was a lot of information coming out about Whole Foods and their organic produce, how it's not even local produce. It's coming over from China, and it's all on their their bags of frozen produce, where it's coming from China, and supposedly it's supposed to be being certified organic by QAI, but they're not certifying it. It's just getting, I don't know what you would want to say, but it's getting fast tracked right over here and put on shelves for people. So I found that really interesting, considering we've always, been told kind of watch out for things from China and this and that. And yet one of the number one sources of organic produce for a lot of people is selling produce from China that's, quote unquote organic, but it's not certified, and there's no way to ensure it is.
Yeah. So from my experience in the produce world and health food stores and various departments that I worked in, Quality Assurance International, which is what QAI stands for, has never been that high a standing. It's definitely not on the level of Oregon Tilth or CCOF or various other certification agencies, and they are internationally based, so it allows them, I think it prevents them, is a better way to say it, from really having the standards that CCOF or some of the other state certifying agencies are able to keep the standards on. But at the same time, it seemed very much like a loophole to me when I came across that information, because it's in the 365 Whole Foods brands, particularly the frozen packaged items that I saw. And, it just says on the back product of China, but QAI doesn't certify anything coming from China. So at the end of the day, I don't know how they're able to even say that those things are organic if there's no certifying agency involved. That's a really interesting question that I would wonder how the FDA looks at. And then two, why we're relying on Chinese produce. I can't imagine it being anything but an economic factor for Whole Foods. But I don't know that whether or not there's Whole Foods in China. I don't think there are. And so, there's enough produce that we throw away in this country and in Canada and even just like North America in general, a lot of stuff that they get through Mexico certain times a year. I would just think they would support that. So the fact that it's coming from China is like pretty wild. And then a lot of things that come from China have to be gassed to come in the country. I know cacao years ago had to be gassed with methyl bromide. I was actually there in my friend's importing facility outside of Philadelphia where his dad owned, and they were importing like a large amount of cacao from South America for, Mars and M&M and those sort of big conglomerates. And they were packaging them up with burlap and then actually spraying the piles of cacao with methyl bromide back in the day. And I found that pretty horrific. And this was got to be more than 15 years ago now. So I really wonder how that works out with Chinese produce. So like even if it is grown organically, let's say in China, and then it's coming to this country, is it being sprayed with some sort of like toxic chemical to kill any insects that could be coming into the country? I think that's a really good question. And then, is like, Whole Foods 365 in general has been known for coming in and buying out farms and being like, oh, we'll pay you ahead of time for your crop, but then only paying the farmer 80% of what the crop is worth oftentimes, but they get their money up front. So a lot of times those farms aren't able to stay in business, whether it's like they're, producing meat or dairy or vegetables and fruit. So that's a factor. But it is sad to me that now our food sources have gotten to this point where, there's a number of things that China won't accept from us, meat-wise and things of that nature. So the fact that they won't accept certain things from our country, but then we're relying on them and our health food industry for filling in the gaps of food is really astonishing. And it just reminds me that, Whole Foods, I believe, is a publicly traded company. And at that point, your responsibility is to your shareholders and creating profit, and not to standards of quality. And I think that this is an important thing to remember in terms of like your choices of where to buy your health food, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, around here, it's really the only place that you can get quote unquote organic produce outside of like the farmers markets and stuff like that. I mean, there's some stuff at some of the other larger grocery chain stores and stuff like that, chain grocery stores, but it's not really that great of anything. It's usually kind of old and they don't take care of the produce the best, and it's gross. So you're better off growing all of it your own. And it's definitely alarming when, like you said, you go to Whole Foods and you see that it's from China. Like, I knew that they had all their produce, or not all, but a lot of the produce comes from local farms, not mentioning the backhanded business practices or anything, but at least that food's coming from local places and at least stateside places. But, like you said, when there's no oversight to make sure that the food's even grown organically, and what organic even means to them certifying it or anything over there on their country's level, like how can it even be done is beyond me. Like, how they're even able to call it organic. But I think it just shows that it's really important for people to be growing their own food and learning how to grow their own food and just trying something, one kind of vegetable at a time or something like that, and finding the local farmers markets where they can support people that do know how to do that stuff. And then, because we don't need to all be able to do everything ourselves. It's nice to have a community where you can go get your food from so-and-so that's doing a really good job. You get your milk and your, dairy from so-and-so, and beef and chicken from somewhere else. And, but we all can grow a little bit of vegetables and stuff like that if we have a little bit of space or land. So,
well, sure, and I think it's also important to delve into a little bit about the integrity of Whole Foods and other health stores. And Whole Foods, I think, was pretty big on getting the non-GMO certified label out there. I have a feeling that they were pretty big on that and marketing that. I don't know that for sure. I'd have to research it a little bit, but I feel like I first started really seeing that on like tortilla packages with the non-GMO corn issue, which is great. And I've seen some studies as far as comparing non-GMO certified and USDA organic and what one can mean and what the other can get away with. But I do think back to last year and seeing that Whole Foods was in the Bay Area where there was a plenty of local farms growing organic corn, or a decent amount of them, and ones that would be willing to if they had a buyer like Whole Foods. They were actually selling full-on GMO Roundup Ready corn fresh in their health food stores. And that is a big change. That, to do that, like, I could see it in canned corn. I could see it even in frozen corn. But to see that done in what most people consider to be a health food store was like a step into the dark side to witness. And I think that it made me think two things. One, is there not enough organic corn to go around and fill all these? I think there's like 550 Whole Foods nationwide, and for fresh corn on the cob. If that's the case, then okay, we have a topic of conversation. But if it's merely just being done for profit and something that they can dress up to look like all natural, and the reality is that it's just Roundup Ready corn fresh, it made me really take a step back in terms of, there's a few gluten-free items that I'll go and get on occasion at Whole Foods that I can only get there and I can't get at the local health food stores where I am. And I'll go, out of my way to get those, like maybe once every couple months. But it made me really think about whether or not I need that in my diet, because at the end of the day, as you and I have talked about, glyphosates are, one of the biggest issues facing humanity in the world, not just like in the agriculture level. And, if you're going to sell Roundup Ready corn fresh, I don't care if it's Safeway, Rallies or Whole Foods, like, I really have to question whether or not I can morally get down with that.
Yeah, I mean, because, corn season, especially like the fresh corn on the cob still that's, in the produce area, it's not an extremely long season. So knowing how business operates, especially when it comes to farms and stuff, I would definitely think Whole Foods has got a pretty set in stone contract to get that kind of stuff. I would think, I wouldn't think they're just like flying by the seat of their pants and like, oh yeah, we'll buy that Roundup corn this time. Like, no, there's no way. Otherwise, it would be, if they were filling orders like that, weekly or monthly based on seasonal produce, they would be much more able to source good stuff locally. Like you said, there's so many farmers that have good amounts of organic corn that would be more than willing to put it on the shelves in there.
It's a decision that's made at the top for sure. Like there's regional purchasers, and then there's national purchasers, and then there's like a global buying team. I can tell you factually, I'm pretty aware of it through my my work and my experience in health food stores. And if I would say this is more of a regional item, but you still, when you're going to lower the standards for whatever reason, if they're lowering the standards in California and the Bay Area, buying corn from Brentwood, then they're definitely doing it in Missouri, and they're definitely doing it in South Carolina, and they're definitely doing it like throughout a lot of areas, and if not nationwide. So I would say that this at some point probably went through the global buying team, and it's just sad. It's it just shows, organic is growing per se in terms of percentage of the food industry. So's the population, and so's the desire to make profit. And when you go back to like the produce that's coming from China, look at how much is coming from China that you buy from Amazon. Look at the labels of what you buy. Amazon's, the quality of thing that you could buy from Amazon 3 years ago versus like what you're getting today is skimmed down significantly because they're all based on profit, and they're getting pressure about how they treat their employees and their employee rights, and people getting hurt in warehouses and doing overtime, and their delivery drivers and why they have to speed because they got to get this many items delivered in a certain period of time. So it's really comes down to efficiency, and profit, and when you want profit to go in line with efficiency, you're going to start buying lesser quality stuff, and that's clear as day. For me with Amazon, and I think the same concept now can be applied to Whole Foods. And once again, for me, it's just no longer a health food store. I would give it the pseudo health food store title, but I wouldn't give it a full health food store title. And I think most people are aware of that. I talk to people all the time at the stand who are like, I'm like, oh, well, like our butter, for example, you can only get at Whole Foods, and you can't get it at other health food stores. And people are like, oh, well, I don't like to shop at Whole Foods. And a majority of people that actually come to the health food store or come to the farmers market are shop at real health food stores, but they're not going to shop at Whole Foods. And I would say that's probably 70-80% of people that I talk to, which is interesting because I think that's gone up from, I'd say 60 to 70% of people 5 years ago would shop at Whole Foods and be all about it. But I think they've really seen as a consumer, the quality standards go down.
Well, I think it also comes into play with like who, the business and the buyers of Whole Foods and Amazon, stuff like that, who they want to see the money go to. I'm sure they have friends here and there, so-and-so contacts to make sure they get those contracts in, to make sure the networking keeps going a certain way. Just like, we talk about how to spend our money, and we like to spend it in certain places. So I definitely see that's probably a reason why they don't even really look around, because there's a ton of local produce in places. I mean, you mentioned Missouri. We grew up, we were running a produce stand down in southern Johnson County, Kansas. And we would drive down to southern Missouri and Kansas and buy produce from the Mennonites and Amish. And literally we'd fill a whole truck bed with organic corn for like $50. And on top of that, they're giving us melons and making us sit down and drink lemonade with them. And then we go back up and we just make a killing selling it, So and they had over 100 acres of corn and stuff like that down there. So it's out there, and it can easily be found if you're willing to support those kind of places. So I think that kind of, to me, just signifies that they're not even looking, or if they are, they're not trying to support those kind of communities and those kind of farmers and make sure that they stick around at all. So,
I mean, the FDA just raided the Amish Mennonite farmer for selling raw milk in Pennsylvania for like the second or third time, and totally, some 18-year-old kid bought eggnog from him and went back to Ohio and drank it and got sick. And then they came and like raided his farm. And, I think you and I looked into that story, but that was not the first time that guy's been raided. He was an Amish farmer with like a food stand on the side of the road type of deal, very, very organic and very direct. And they're in dairy. We've seen for the last decade, they're trying to shut that kind of stuff down, but I don't think they want that kind of localized food source in general. I don't think that. I think that's the enemy of, the Jeff Bezos of the world and the World Economic Forum and these sort of people.
Right, real nutrition. I mean, like you said, you got Whole Foods dancing around, presenting themselves as one of the number one health food stores. But, like you said, they're selling GMO Roundup Ready corn, and almost every boxed or bagged item on the shelves has seed oils in it. And it's,
I mean, they're very much the biggest health food store outfit if you're going to give them the health food declaration, which most people will. We could debate that all day. But I also think that, just localizing your food source is critical, because like you said, the seed oils are in everything. I think Sprouts is like the second biggest health food company, across the country, and they're borderline health food. Like, there are a lot of packaged bulk nuts and different things. Like half their store, I feel like a third of their store is the bulk department. And they're trying and they're stepping up in some ways, but I if you're like, there's a really great market in Berkeley called the Monterey Market, and there it's like all fresh produce, like 80% of it, and they have everything throughout the year. And anything that's available, they have it, and they're conventional and organic, but predominantly organic. And that's what I'd like to see as far as health food stores, is like 50% of it is fresh food. And that's why we like shopping at farmers markets, because 50% of it is fresh food. And I think that when it's packaged and it's bulked up and whatever, you're just allowing these big conglomerates to get bullshit into your diet that's like causing people cancer and causing people to get sick and causing, whether it's seed oils or whether it's high fructose corn syrup or whatever. It's like, more than ever, you got to read your ingredients, but when you do, it's depressing.
Yeah, we definitely lose out for convenience. And, when the product's cheaper and more convenient, then you got to definitely rethink what's going into the product, obviously.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we used to like to go like
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, we used to like to go to like that natural grocers. They used to have pretty good fruit and stuff like that. But that's really the only thing we really like to get from a lot of the stores is the produce, the fruit, especially when we're living in places where they don't, you can't grow as much locally. But like here, you can get a lot of local exotic fruit.
I hear great things about natural grocers. I think they're the real deal, from what I understand. And I think it's tough for health food stores these days to maintain a certain level of integrity. But I appreciate the ones who are trying and aren't just based on profit. And that's the problem. When any company becomes publicly traded, you're now in the hands of the shareholders to make them profits. And, I think I realized this in life probably 10 or 12 years ago, and it made me kind of reshape the way I look at a lot of stuff that I purchase. But it's the reality. It's like, your motivation now is profit. It's never going to be quality or supporting something on a moral or ethical level. And on occasion, maybe you can align with that, but like, it's not going to last long. And it's the major problem with capitalism and the intersection of it with the environment. And I'm not a non-capitalist, but I think just capitalism at whatever cost is a major issue for Americans in terms of our health.
Yeah, and the big cornerstone that kind of makes capitalism kind of suck in America is the fact that most of the workforce doesn't realize that they need to capitalize on the number one resource they have, which is their labor and time. So, they need to not get bottom dollared and settle for minimum wage and bullshit wages. Meanwhile, the companies are raking in millions. So, if people actually value their money or their time and their labor and get paid accordingly, then it kind of levels things out a little bit better. But that's not going to, like you said, you start getting into publicly traded companies and you start seeing layoffs and ingredients getting swapped out for other ingredients and all sorts of fun things like that are done behind closed doors. It's kind of like, and then it's realizing, like, when you look at labels, like, just because like Tom's toothpaste is organic, it's still owned by Colgate. Like, is that really who you want to be supporting on a regular basis? So just because it's organic this or organic that, and even if the ingredients are all right, sometimes you're just patting the dollars of people who are out pumping poison in other places. So
yeah, it reminds me of something I just heard about Dr. Bronner's, which I'm not going to get into, but it's funny to see them like, always listed like as a regenerative supporter, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, cool. So like, what's regenerative about your soap that's like not even organic? At the end of the day, It's got a bunch of cool like writings on it and sayings and whatever, but it's like, what are you supporting at the end of the day? And, I know that guy's been integral in the cannabis scene in terms of certification of supposedly proper stuff. But I'm like, half the stuff you're supporting, like when you look at those farms that you're taking pictures of, none of that's native dirt. All of that's like perlite infused potting soil that you're like, oh, they're growing it so coolly. But at the end of the day, it's like, you're not doing anything to benefit the microbiome when you're doing that. Really?
Yeah,
really? What do you do?
They're also huge supporters and financiers of Prop 64. So, I mean, I don't think too many real craft legacy farmers are really happy with the way Prop 64 is gotten rolled out and whatnot. Certain people, including them, have been still like through their certifications and whatnot. We can go into it in really good detail on another episode for sure. But it's just I'm not a fan of Prop 64, and I wasn't really looking to support companies that were promoting it when they were trying to pass the legislation. So that's back when I stopped using Dr. Bronner's, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and we can certainly delve into it like very in depthly on another episode. But yeah, at the end of the day, the majority of people, companies that backed Prop 64 did not have the craft cannabis growers' best interests in mind by any means,
and likely had something to gain through the whole passing of the legislation. So
yeah, but then at the same time, when you do a bunch of promoting of legalization of psychedelics, and then you're talking about like I'm not against plant-based medicine in any level, whether it's like ayahuasca or cactus or psychedelic mushrooms, in terms of like its potential benefits for anti-depression and things like that. I think there is research that could be benefited from doing that. I mean, I trust Mother Earth to provide us the medicine that we need in almost every case, if not all cases. But then at the same time, when I remember like watching a video about the interview with them, and they're like, oh yeah, but we're also going to, as part of the psilocybin legalization, we're also going to legalize ketamine. And I was like, what the fuck does ketamine have to do with legalization of mushrooms? Like, I don't like the way that those two got kind of banded together and as part of this like legislation that they were trying to pass. I was like, that's sketchy to me, because majority of people that I knew back in the day on Fish Shore that got really into ketamine, like it ruined their lives. I saw kids throw away shitloads of money that they saved in really dumbass ways on ketamine, and saw people just fall apart on that kind of stuff, abusing it. And I failed to see where there's a lot of like medicinal benefit from that chemical drug. So I just don't understand how we can like band together plant-based medicine with chemical drugs. I think that they should be separated for sure if we're going to talk about their benefits on the human mind and body and spirit. But that's it just made me question the overall integrity of that promoter in that case, I'll say.
Totally.
But yeah, I mean, speaking of China, should we delve into the Fauci bullshit that happened this week, the COVID version of the 9/11 Commission?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth touching on a little bit. I think it's relevant, and I think some kind of things came to light with his whole testimony and whatnot that just show that America's best interests were never really being taken into consideration through any of the rules and regulations they were trying to push. Fauci came out and said he just made up the whole 6 foot distancing and all those different things for how we should be taking.
Did he? He came out and said that?
Yeah, and they all of that stuff was made up. So.
Well, I did hear that they're gonna make Andrew Cuomo testify next week, so that'd be really interesting to see how he defends his care of the elderly in senior homes in New York. That'll be an interesting one. But yeah, I mean, I'd sent you the little excerpt from Rand Paul being interviewed about Fauci's testimony, and I thought it was really interesting how he called out the Fauci's like assistant David Morenz, who had apparently already testified. So he testified first, and then Fauci went afterwards and was talking about how he barely knew him and how his office was in another building. And, after David Morenz had already admitted to destroying evidence, which obviously he did for his senior fellow. I don't think he would do that on his own. But I think it just was another example of the integrity of these people and how, I'm sure that Fauci didn't come up with this all on his own, but,
Right.
He's also somewhat following a script for, people in power in this world. And I think it just obviously shows that they never had our best interests towards health and avoiding this, pandemic to begin with.
Right. And I mean, Rand Paul was bringing up a pretty good thing, talking about, how Fauci and them were looking at function of gain, trying to figure out how to, play with the different pathogens, viruses, whatever you want to call them, and see how they could change, tweak them and make them disperse differently or, communicable in different ways. And I thought it was interesting that he brought up Ebola, considering, we happen to have one of these pandemics or some kind of crazy outbreak every election year. And the one that happened during Obama was an Ebola one, if you remember that, where they were forcibly quarantining a few people. I think there was one in New York and one in Texas, and then there was a few other people that were forcibly quarantined. But it's just every election year, it just happens to be some funky outbreak, a bird flu, a swine flu, and they're just pumping things through the media. I think there was something about someone tested positive for bird flu in Mexico for the first time ever.
I don't think it's just in Mexico. I think a human being is tested positive for it in this country, actually. But I'm not. I feel like one or two, in fact. And I do know that it spread into other animals. I was shared some information that I said I would not repeat, so I'm not going to repeat it. But it has spread into animals that are domesticated pets for people's houses. I'll say that. That's as far as I'll go. And I don't think on a large scale, but it is an issue with the bird flu. But going back to the Ebola thing, Ebola is always a really interesting one for me because I had a friend who was making colloidal silver and colloidal gold water, tea infused water, and he was following this really specific method, which I would buy gallons of, and it was really tremendous. It really helped me not get sick for a couple winters, and the colloidal gold was really amazing for hand-eye coordination. I really had some benefits from taking that. But I remember that when the Ebola thing broke out and was getting kind of out of control in Africa, and they were really starting to go to the World Health Organizations and these various agencies and say, we need help. What do we do? One of the ideas that got thrown out right when it was starting to be have we lost control of this was to potentially use colloidal silver, which, I used post-COVID and I really recommend to people all the time for boosting their immune systems. I've heard that if you gave colloidal silver to cattle in a high enough dose, you probably wouldn't have to give them antibiotics. So there's some real benefits to it. So with Ebola, they were talking about, somebody came out and said, hey, well, why don't we try using colloidal silver for it? And pretty much within a couple weeks after it was, I think, suggested by an agency under the World Health Organization or the actual World Health Organization, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the Ebola thing went away, very quickly. So they were able to target the disease in whatever method that they decided to without using colloidal silver. But they really, it seemed to me, didn't want the benefits of a holistic remedy like colloidal silver to get out there for the masses and see a real benefit to it. So that was really interesting mass that kind of got thrown out there. And then with Rand Paul talking about Ebola, what he was saying was, one of the things that they do with the gain of function research is they change the delivery method, right? So they'll go in a lab and they'll change the delivery method. And so with Ebola, it was spread through bodily fluids, which is normally the first way that, a disease of this nature will become spreadable. And so he was like, what if they aerosolized Ebola? Imagine what that would do. And so whatever they did in Wuhan at the lab, it's now come out in this testimony that 3 doctors, which I remember early on, I think by like May, hearing about this, and at that time weren't supposed to talk about it or whatever, but the 3 doctors that did get infected by it. And then it came out like 4 or 6 months later that the 3 doctors that got sick in November, mind you, we were, nationally made aware of this issue March 12th. So a solid 4 to 5 months later, it came out that these doctors, and I think this is like October-ish, October to December from what I remember, maybe November, these doctors had actually taken public transit after getting sick to go to the hospital and get dealt with. And that was when I was like, what the fuck? I was like, okay, everything everything you don't know, like, why wouldn't you quarantine these people and get them the help they need? Why wouldn't you bring help to them and keep them quarantined? To know that they're sick from potentially something that they're working on with gain of function research, and then put them in the public like that, that's just crazy for me. And I'm not
like some Resident Evil shit.
Yeah, I'm not going to say intentional, but anybody that's not asking that question has to take some classes in critical thinking. And so now it's coming out that these 3 doctors got it in November and blah, blah, blah. And, it makes us really have to question the financing of gain of function. But then Fauci's still denying it, still questioning it, still debating the financing that we're giving to these different laboratories, not only in China. There's like, if you do look into it, there's like 12 or 16 laboratories spread throughout the United States where they're doing similar. And some of these laboratories are not like federally funded. And some of the research that they're doing is private, which there should be governing bodies all over this, keeping an eye on it. So the fact that this is happening kind of underground, to me, is one of the more startling aspects of any of the gain of function research. And I do see where there could be benefit of staying ahead of some of these things, but changing the transmission of diseases that are killing tens of thousands of people, regardless of the disease, is something that I think we really need to question, and I'd like to see more oversight on. And I'm not generally into government oversight. And maybe it's not government oversight, but yeah, what the fuck are we doing at this point?
Yeah, and and what would be the purpose of it, especially considering the fact that we do have a treaty to not use and create and use bioweapons and stuff like that. So there's no, outside of war, there's really no reason to change how you can transmit those viruses and things like that. It's just, I think that further highlights intent. But
well, yeah, and when you're hiding emails and you're hiding messages and you're having your assistant, come with you and only having in-person conversations at your house about very important aspects of these issues, it pretty much shows a lack of credibility with your intentions. And I definitely don't think anybody that's overseeing gain of function research that's that serious and can cause that big an issues for millions of people worldwide, as we saw in this case potentially, if you're like look at the credentials we make teachers have to teach in our schools and how many people they affect, right? It's dozens. It's 100 people. It's not thousands. It's not tens of thousands. It's not hundreds of thousands. It's definitely not millions of people. So why do we have standards for people that are gaining that much profit potentially with their private endeavors, and yet we don't have these same standards for people that are teaching our children? Like that's just one metaphor I think of off the top of my head.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and that's why we homeschool. It's just you grow your own food, grow your own herbs and medicine, and homeschool your kids, and just produce everything on your own. Because right now, everything is suspect, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's I'm really trying not to be doom and gloom. It's fucking challenging, but. I mean, I'm still going to ask the questions because it's just so baffling to me. And I don't even think that Fauci acted on his own. I think that he was the point person for an agenda that was much bigger than him, that was planned for a long period of time. And so I'm not a fan of him even being the scapegoat. I think that he was the figurehead talking about all this stuff. And he was the person talking about, masks not being having efficacy, and then masks have efficacy, and you should wear the KN95, or the masks don't really do anything. And there was a lot of hypocritical statements that came out of his people or him himself, sure, but the agenda was much bigger, and that's what we need to be aware of. And I think that you see an example of it this week. It's like I'm not totally clued into how often they're bringing up, testifying about COVID issues or Fauci or Andrew Cuomo. Like I'm not up to date on that. I'll admit it. Like if it comes out, I'll hear about it. But at the same time, like hearing about that, but we're not hearing about, various other topics around that are much bigger and represent bigger entities, like this pandemic treaty, for example. And that all these countries have signed on or are in the process of signing on to this pandemic treaty that really erodes in a much more significant way our personal rights. And then this past week, the Slovenian leader who came out saying 2 days previous to this event, saying that he wasn't going to support the pandemic treaty, and then he gets shot in broad daylight in public. And nobody's talking about that. Like nobody at all. So, what are we really doing?
Well, so, like you said, we hand over our rights and our power to the WHO, the World Health Organization, which isn't anything for the United States of America. And they just wreak havoc on our society and laws and crazy things things like that pandemic treaty. And, again, another example is something like the Federal Reserve, which really isn't federal anything. It's just another private company that's playing games. And when you really step back and look at it, you can see these are all just, it's kind of like high school gangsters and mafia guys wanting to just pat each other's backs and make us sure we play their game and that we're, using their money and their coins and abiding by the WHO's rules, and how that's where we're going to usher in the meat credits and carbon credits that individuals get to have for their smart cities and all that good fun stuff. And again, we're letting people talk about our rights when they have no place to talk about our rights at all anyways, so it's definitely setting up for a wild time out there in the real world. When you think about what they're talking about with the treaty and all those different things, and how would they even enforce it? The number one way the WHO enforces anything is with the UN. So,
yeah, and that's how I really became a big fan of Dave Smith. Who I really enjoyed his conversation, debate, if you will, with Chris Cuomo. But I remember hearing Dave Smith for the first time like 5 or 6 years ago, and really beginning to understand how important the Constitution was and the erosion of it. And that's how I became personally disenfranchised with the left, which under Obama, because I just saw the degradation of our rights. The Bill of Rights went away, and they're trying to erode with censorship, our freedom of speech, and the Constitution, and some of these other issues. And I can't quote the Constitution the way I'd like to, or I hear a lot of people do it. But when people make the point and they talk about it, I remember not knowing 10% of what I do now about the world, and hearing that and being like, wait a second, this is a pretty big issue. And there's very few people on the right or left who discuss the Constitution anymore. And that's where I will oftentimes listen to libertarians, because most of the real libertarians do fall back on that as kind of the premise with which our country was built and should be maintained. And in many cases, I agree with that. And I don't give a fuck if we're going into a technocracy. Like, at the end of the day, like, these were written very well by people who, wanted to set cardinal rules with which the foundation of our society could be built. And yeah, they may evolve slightly, but not to the degree that they're getting manipulated nowadays in terms of eroding our personal rights.
Well, right. And that, you have individuals in the government that are trying to get rid of the Constitution. It's outdated. It's just paper, pen to paper and whatnot. And we're, like you said, we're way past it in certain areas. But, the number one thing that they're going to do when they do that is hide things like the opening up in the preamble that these are God-given rights. These aren't rights that are given to us by the government. They're given to us by God. And the Constitution is not limiting our rights. It's just defining how we're limiting the government's effects on our rights. And they try to totally invert it and make it sound like, the government is the one who provides you your rights. And the Constitution limits your rights, and they're trying to use it to limit rights. And in reality, it's the exact opposite. The Constitution is there to protect our rights and to limit how they can even talk about our rights and affect our rights. But yet, so little people know anything about the Constitution or, how things are going on. And like you said, under Obama, and even before that with, during 9/11, they passed the Patriot Act and all that fun stuff. Like, we really just watched our rights just go bye-bye. Probably goes all the way back to the early 90s when, W's daddy ushered in the new, the globalist agenda.
Well, yeah, I agree. And I might push back a little bit on the God-given part of our rights, just because I think there's a lot of people who should still enjoy those rights that don't believe in God. And
well, it's the premise of it's the premise that we're born with these rights, though. That's the whole premise behind God-given rights. It doesn't really matter what God you would believe in or anything. It's the fact that you're born with these rights and no one gives them to you. No man gets to give them to you. That's the whole premise behind God-given rights.
Sure, but like religion in schools, the way we pushed it away, when we entitle it being given by God, that allows these, I would say, fairly satanic agenda following people to have an angle to fight them. And I don't even want to give them that premise. Like, I just want to say they're rights that every human should enjoy, and regardless of where they come from. We've decided this as a society, and the majority of us agree with it. And, I'd love to see a poll on how many, Americans still believe in the premise that the, foundation of the Constitution allows us. Because I haven't seen anything that most people don't, think it's outdated or agree with it. I just think there's certain entities out there that are trying to push back against it to benefit their own personal agendas instead of like the majority of mankind and that exists in the United States. So that's my only issue on it.
Yeah. I mean, bottom line is they're coming for our rights, and they've been doing it for a long time.
Yeah. It's clear. And I do think this pandemic treaty is a pretty, when you look into it and what they want to do, if you thought you were blessed to get out of, like, let's say having to do the COVID vaccine, or, still being able to eat at restaurants, having not done it, or whatever, however it affected your life if you chose not to get that vaccine, that's no longer going to be an option under this treaty, which most countries have signed on to. And, they've had to rewrite it a little bit in certain areas, but I think what a lot of us saw the videos of what was happening in Australia and some of these other parts of the world, and even things that were happening in the United States. And I can't imagine living in a world where that's the case, but it seems to be getting closer and closer. I don't know if I'd say every day, but every week I see something that happens where it's like, wow, this is really the way we're going. And it's not happening for like most rich and famous people, but for the common man, it's coming, and it's coming quicker and quicker every day.
I like to think of it kind of like it's like, with the whole thing on how like the Wuhan thing went down and letting them just travel freely on the subways to go home and whatnot. Combine that with the way birthing's going and the control of rights and whatnot. And I like to think it's really a good mix of like Resident Evil and Children of Men, where, they're going to control how you can travel, and no one's they're going to try and keep track of every birth for sure, because they're going to happen less and less as they already are. They had I couldn't remember the name of the guy, but they love to try and, romanticize these movies and things. And it just seems like that's the way they're pushing things, with that kind of doom and gloom and the control. And, they really push those kind of movies all the time anyways. Like whether it's like I said, Children of Men, V for Vendetta, they're all in these authoritarian futures where we're just pawns in the labor force. And that's what Rockefeller wanted, They didn't want a nation of free thinkers. They wanted a nation of workers. And that's how they defined the education system. And
keep us busy too, so the state can get access to our kids at a younger and younger age, which is definitely full on the agenda that's going on. But speaking of movies, I saw a really good film this past week called They Live from 1988. It's a Jon Carpenter movie, who did The Thing. And apparently it was only out in theaters for a very short period of time, and it was doing well, and then they pulled it. And so a friend of mine turned me onto it, and I watched a significant portion of it this week. And it's some of the things that occur in 1988, and then you compare the world now to then. I mean, they have like drones and some of the concepts of just, it's a bit spoofy, the film. I would say it's like kind of, a little bit like cheesy 70s, 80s film, but they throw in some very real shit. And the main character is actually Rowdy Roddy Piper, which is kind of funny because I never took him very serious as an actor, even though I've seen him in a few things. But it's like, not to ruin it, but this group manufactures these glasses, these sunglasses that you put on. And when you put the sunglasses on, you see everything in a different perspective of what you would see it in. And so the billboards on in a city that were advertising Marlboro cigarettes will now say like obey or something like that. And it goes even further into that whole agenda. And it's really well done considering it's from 1988. And it's interesting that they took it seriously enough to where they made them pull the film out of the theaters. That was really the inspiring thing to me about watching it was, I found it like a little spoofy and a little cheesy, and there's like a 20-minute fight scene that's like, dude, come on, you could have done that in 5 minutes. But at the same time, the concepts that they get out there, I don't think people were ready for it in 1988. Maybe very few people, but nowadays with the internet, there's much more people that have gotten woken up, shall we say, from, spending hours on YouTube or whatever other forum or listening to podcasts and being able to trace down information, which, without reading books back in the day was very difficult to find. But it's well done. And it's another interesting aspect of like there were people in this world thinking about the same things that we're thinking about now back then. But now we've fast forwarded into a realm of totalitarianism that I think is going to be hard to steer away from as we
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry.
Definitely worth a watch. The They Live 1988 Jon Carpenter film. Very, very worth watching.
Yeah, I think everyone that's been on like social media and stuff has seen like clips of it, but probably doesn't know where the movie is, you know. It's pretty common to see like you said, the clip where he sees like the Marvel ads where it says obey, and sees some of the people as like skeletons and things like that underneath their skin. They're like
Totally.
Creepy alien looking things. Yeah, that was good times.
But yeah, I mean, I always used to say, like, you know, when I you know, first kind of like became aware from at least my perspective about 9/11, because I'm not trying to offend anyone who's still holding on to those beliefs, but you know, Oklahoma City or 9/11 or the, you know, several things that have happened in our lives that have woken some of us up. I always used to think like that these things were like coming, but not like, you know, in our lifetime. And now with digital ID and these sort of things, I feel like they're here. And another thing that I used to think is that, you know, like, who are these people that are making these decisions? Like, they can't be humans and make these decisions that are going to affect their children or affect all these friends of theirs or people around them's children in this really adverse way. Like, they have to be answering to a different calling. And I felt like that film delved into that whole concept of like, you know, are they really humans that are making these decisions? Like, do they have some agreement with some other race of beings in some other universe, or are we just here doing work for something else? Or just it
even if they are, do they think they are?
Exactly. And I feel like actually Alex Jones tapped into that and what he was quoted as saying recently in the I think Tucker Carlson was with somebody, and they were talking about the Alex Jones interview from 2017, where he like really aptly describes the way things are going to go. And now when you look at it in 2024 with, you know, and Alex Jones is obviously responsible for saying all kinds of crazy shit, but he describes the technocracy, totalitarian, you know, authoritarian kind of direction of things with AI in 2017 in a more eloquent, descriptive manner than I've heard anybody talk about in the last 7 years, including last week. Like, it's just the way he describes it. It's like, how the fuck did you come up with this? And when you think about what's going on today, it's just so apt. And, you know, regardless of where it's coming from, it's coming. And it's just cool to see people able to channel that 25, 30, 40 years ago even. I admire that, whether it's like George Orwell, 1984, or this film, or, you know, A Clockwork Orange would be another film that I'd point to. But that's the beauty of art, I think, is you're able to kind of channel that inner wisdom from your intuition.
Yeah. I mean, it was really interesting because that's when, you know, technology was really booming. You know, you think back to when we were kids in the 80s and stuff, like no one had cell phones and people just disappeared into the ether and went out and played for 4 or 5 hours a day and just showed back up, you know, and no one knew where you were or who you were with, and no one was posting pictures of it. And I think, you know, it's interesting that people way back then just saw how it was all going to be used for surveillance and controlling and trying to, you know, just monitor us 24/7, you know, whether it's through your phone and social media scores and trying to digitalize all the finances for people. And it's just, you know, as the technology just unraveled itself, it just continued to give them more and more ways of controlling things. And so it was really interesting that they saw it before any of that technology even existed, really.
Well, it's got to make you wonder how long the technology's really existed. I think
Right.
we're told, like, it's pretty common to know that DARPA is 20, 25 years ahead of the game. So if they're able to use like cloaking technology in military battlefields, or whether they're, able to do this or that with Google with tracking your data, like, have they been able to do this for 25 years? Were they able to do this before the internet was even put into play? Was this the motivation on financing the internet and financing Eric Schmidt and Sergey Brin while they were still at Stanford, studying before they even had their degrees? Like, I think these are, valid questions now the further we get into this.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's like, once they say, oh yeah, we can do this, well, they've been practicing it for 10 years, and usually it's on the public that they're practicing it. So, there's all sorts of things come out where, like, they fogged some kind of pharmaceutical in the Bay Area a long time ago and really had an adverse effect on a lot of people. I'll have to look it up and find the exact event that it was, but there's the whole Tuskegee experiments. I mean, there's historical event after historical event of them doing experiments on people and all these things, and then down the road, oh yeah, we can do this now. We can clone.
Well, yeah, and yet the majority of us continue to say, like, oh, they wouldn't do that.
Right.
Oh, they wouldn't do that. But there's documented evidence of them doing that in more than one cases, in many ways when you describe it. And it's like, but we continue to say, oh, well, they wouldn't do that. You can trust your government. It's like, I mean, I can tell you, working in the public, man, like, I plant seeds all the time that I probably shouldn't, but like, I just can't resist. And I can't tell you how many people are like, yeah, I know, or I agree, or yeah, like, and they understand that, like, and it comes up a lot when people are like, should I pay with cash or credit card? And I have various responses to that I try to make somewhat thought-provoking, because I'm like, I don't want you just to think about this when you're buying this product from my stand. I want you to think about this all the fucking time, all the time.
Yeah.
So what can I say that just plants a little seed that maybe hopefully grows in your mind? Because somebody did that for me once upon a time, and I'm grateful to those people. I'm super grateful, And yeah, sometimes I use my credit card to get my 2% cash back or whatever. I don't want to break a 50 or 100 in my wallet, because that's kind of how I like to, use, save money, so to speak. But at the same time, like, if we're still asking for a small company that you believe in, whether cash or credit card is better, we have a long way to go in society. A long fucking way.
I agree. I mean, like you said, I have digital money, like through like Venmo, and PayPal and shit like that I try and use at the chain stores and bullshit places and paying bills. But yeah, when it comes to anything that's local, and especially locally owned, even if it's like a chain store but it's still locally owned, like a good franchise, like maybe the Tractor Supply Company or something, I try and always use cash and just kind of keep it going. But and they definitely, it gets harder and harder to get cash for some people some days. So it's interesting, because like you said, we obviously have a long ways to go of like reminding people how to like support their local businesses, but at the same time, more and more people don't even have cash to even ask anyways. So sure. It's kind of becoming a moot point where people don't know better, which is, again, probably all by design.
Oh yeah, let's praise the universal basic income. So it gets here. I mean, that was a really brilliant part of COVID, was how they were able to roll that out, and that concept, and make people be like, oh, don't worry, we'll give you $700. That might buy you groceries for a week for your family. People were like so fucking excited about $700 or $1,400, and they're like, and then like this whole younger generation of people that were like, oh, cool, I'm just not going to work. I don't want to risk my life and work, and it's, and I don't know, like, don't we kind of have a responsibility to contribute? Like, don't you see all these people in society struggling? So like, okay, so don't work, but maybe go garden and grow some food, or maybe go donate some time to a homeless shelter, or whatever the fuck it is. Like, we have an obligation to contribute. That's the deal. And, you know, I didn't really realize that in my 20s, but I definitely feel that now more than ever, because you see things crumbling around you. And it's like, how do I fix it? Well, I fix it by figuring out a way to contribute in a positive way.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, I think a big thing that kind of came across through all of that too is like, you know, how frivolous the whole system is. Like, if you can just not work, if they can just send kids home from school and let them miss out on 3 months of school and then pass them to the next grade, like, it just shows how unimportant all of it is anyways, and how meaningless some of these people's jobs are as far as like, you know, what it actually contributes to what we need. And they were just probably part of a money system anyways, where, like you said, if they were to go home and start actually like farming and doing like, you know, finding some hobby that generates some passion and maybe generates a little income for them, and eventually they take off with it a lot of times, where they can actually affect people and individuals in their community versus some bullshit job, 9 to 5, making money for Wells Fargo or some shit, you know. It's all going on the stock markets, where now they have AI. A majority of the trades going on the stock market are all AI driven. So it's like, there's not even people. So people are working for corporations to pump the stock market when there's not even people trading on the stock market. It's getting to be AIs and computer algorithms. So it just shows how frivolous the whole thing is.
Yeah, it's on steroids for sure. Well, I feel like we've covered some pretty good topics today. Anything else you want to discuss?
No, I think, like you said, I think we covered some good ones, and I think we've touched on a few things that we can bring up later down the road. And there's plenty of things going on. It seems like major event after major events, just, you know, fast forward right now. So
yeah,
current events
indeed.
don't stop coming.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna try to go get some soil and water analysis done today or on Monday, and try to get some of the last of my veggies planted here before I have to leave for the weekend. But it's been enjoyable to touch base with you and get into it a bit. And yeah, let's see what the next week or so has in store for us in the world.
Yeah, I've got a pretty lackluster evening and weekend myself, but just a little garden weeding. But it was great talking to you, and like you said, it'll be interesting to see what happens that we can talk about next time. Look forward to it.
Yeah. Open ideas for sure. So that's the beauty of talking to 800 people a weekend or 1,000 people a weekend. I'm sure somebody will bring something up.
Oh yeah, that's always fun.
But all right, well, I hope you and the family have a great weekend. We appreciate all of your time for tuning in today, and please leave any messages about things you want us to discuss or research or anything that strikes your fancy.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate you guys.
All right, appreciate you. We'll talk soon. Bye.